All right, welcome back to the latest Rising Stars episode. This is our August episode. A lot of interesting things happening right now outside of even all the litigation, but with PP1 dropping, the Westat memo, starting to get a lot of information. Today, we'll kind of dig in on that. So with me, we've got Phil Collins. He leads our health plan strategy team. And we've also got Dan Weaver. And Dan, currently SVP of Stars and Quality for Zing Healthcare. But Dan has been kind of a friend of Rising Stars and a friend of Hyperlift back from before Hyperlift was Hyperlift. So this is, what our 10th, 12th PP1 time together, and looking forward, as always, to getting your insights and what are you seeing. So with that, anything additional you'd like to throw in here, Dan?
No, happy to be here. As I've heard recently in a commercial, it's been a good time for a long time.
All right, so let's jump in. So PP1, it's that kind of first glance at this. The data's dropped in. Kind of what did you guys do kind of initially when this stuff comes out? What is your typical process? And then maybe how does that flow into the PP2 activities?
Great question, Mick. A lot of hoping and praying. No. PP1 is an interesting time, right? I mean, we get bombarded with a lot of end-of-year data from CMS in the weeks and months leading up to that, in a lot of cases in the days leading up to that. That gives us our first real view into, say our finalized CAPS results where we actually get to see cut points, and that's an interesting insight. We get our HOS results, which is a black box for a lot of folks because of so much delay and, just it being so obscure compared to CAPS. And then, we start to see all the things for the first time really come together. So whether we're leveraging a tool like yours, to see where we think we're going to land, and making sure that those data points are accurate, or whether we're waiting for that surprise, like, okay, where did my plan all-cause readmission rate calculate once we figured out what the nation actually did this year? It is your first sanity check. It is also often oddly full of surprises. There have been many seasons in the past decade there where there's been some anomalies and you get caught off guard by some random thing that just wasn't what you expected. You get a score you weren't expecting to get, or you don't get a score that you were expecting to get, or the score that you get is just wildly different than what you were getting. So, for most people, it's the first view of that to give you a sanity check. Your executive teams are, always chomping at the bit to know, like, okay, so did we get what we thought, or what were those couple of outliers? So we know, what does this mean for the models? But it's also an annoyance, you will, because now you're just in a waiting period for plan period preview 2 to come out when you see your cut points and know, so what does this all actually mean?
So, and that's kind of it. So like with the executives are essentially we're getting the rates, but we don't have the ratings yet. So is it now we're going to run it through different models and say, essentially we could end up here, but kind of in this range. Is that kind of what people are looking for right now?
Yeah, I think that's what normally, in a normal year, most people are doing, right? They're taking that information now that it's been solidified. And really, the only outstanding variable that you've got left is the wild card that something changes before plan period preview 2. CMS identifies there was some data discrepancy that affects everybody and they have to fix it. That's typically less common. More often, you're just saying, now that I know what these really are, my variables cut points. So how close am I to that proximity and an up or a down? What is my likelihood? I know we've worked together for many years. I leverage your tools at Hyperlift for, a lot of data modeling throughout the year, but then I couple that with stochastic modeling so that I'm looking at probabilities, and I can tell my board, I can tell my CEO, like, hey, if I just use what we think is the most likely output, like this is what we're going to get. But, there's definitely chances here and there in these couple of places where we're just too close to a cut point, or where this cut point's moved. I said in a normal year. We are not in a normal year. We are in a year of wild litigations where most of the conversation is questioning, okay, so is CMS going to come out and tell us all that they're applying the Clover ruling methodology to everybody, that they're going to give us the same, alternate calculations that they did for star year 26 in the retro? Is it going to be some hybrid between the two? Are we just going to move forward as if nothing else had ever happened and wait for 15 people to go sue CMS because they don't like the results that they get in Plan Period Preview 2? This is not a normal year.
Yeah. How are you
why do you
balancing
think
that? Oh, go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please.
No, I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say, how are you balancing? How are you? Yeah,
No, no,
me,
really.
me. How are you balancing that? Well, as you still ultimately report to somebody, obviously. So, are they asking to what are the 5 different outcomes here that we could see? Or are you just saying, well, we got to wait?
Well, no, we definitely always look at the possible outcomes. So we've got a model for every scenario that we think is a realistic scenario. I will say I'm not going to go crazy with it. I mean, I'm not going to build stochastic probabilities on every possible scenario under the sun out there. But what we have done is definitely taken what we think is at least the most likely outcomes and then run those through. Okay, what happens if CMS replicates what they did in the recalculation for star year 26? What happens if somebody wins on one of these lawsuits to say, I want the Clover treatment instead of just, the treatment that you gave us? What if somebody takes it to the next step? That's actually the one I've been waiting for that says, well, wait a minute, you can't just toss out the Haas measures and the CAPS measures that you don't like. You got to get rid of all of them. So let's get rid of this one and this one as well and do that full set. We've run kind of all of those different scenarios and have those numbers at the ready. And I would assume that every other health plan out there is doing something very similar because in some cases, depending on obviously how you perform in those measure sets, you can wild differences between those various versions. I mean, I can safely say that, in some of those scenarios, like you've got plans that are not hitting a 4-star that are going to jump up to a 4 if some of them get applied. And since CMS is getting bombarded with lawsuits, I think we're all questioning who's going to be the next one to jump in to say, well, wait a minute, you can't give them what they want without giving me what I want to.
And it definitely seems like they even had some issues during PP1. I mean, I don't know if your plan specifically had issues, but we saw plans that were expecting improving and maintaining scores. They didn't get them, but then they got an update last week. I think it was Friday. They got emails that, oh, actually, you're right. We were supposed to give you a score. Here's the score for those 2. Reviewing appeals got updated. And, I know one of the big surprises, too, that we sometimes see during PP1 is that SNP care management measure. If you end up having a data validation issue, a lot of leaders don't realize you don't get that measure thrown out. It's a 1-star and it's taken out of QI. I know we had a few health plans that unfortunately did that too, and they don't really find out until PP1, that there was a data validation issue there. So, yeah, it seems like they're still kind of sorting some things out. So I would not be surprised if there's some hands raised between now and even when PP2 comes out.
Well, so it's an interesting dilemma, Phil, because there's issues and then there's surprises. Typical methodology from most of the folks that I've ever talked to in this, and certainly something we've always looked at is, Plan Period Preview 1 comes out. When you get a surprise, whether it's an issue or a surprise, you need to get your facts straight. So if it truly caught you off guard, you weren't expecting a rate from CMS on something that you got a rate on, meaning it's lower than you expected, higher than you expected, whatever. The first place most people do is immediately dive into data validation to understand the discrepancy. Whether you want to act on that discrepancy or not, maybe based on whether it's a favorable discrepancy or not. I can safely say there were a lot of anomalies this year, and I've heard noise from many folks out there that I try to talk to and just get a sense of what's going on as well. A lot of weird inconsistencies that I hadn't seen in previous years. And having been in this for a long time now, I mean, I can think back to 2 times at least where CMS has had to toss measures out basically in PP2 where they came back and we weren't expecting it, but all of a sudden they said, based on data, inconsistencies with the delegated third party or whatever, we are not going to include these measures in calculation. So that can go, again, same way. Let's just say you're one of those plans that performs 4 and 5 stars or whatever on your, TTY foreign language measures. And all of a sudden they have some wild discrepancy like they've had before. If they tossed those, that could hurt your scores. So now what are you going to do? Say, well, it's not my fault. I did well. I know what my score was. It's going to be an
Well, and I
interesting.
think that's a big part of it right now. You know, what you were just talking about, you know, if they tossed call center, but frankly, it's like
They won't toss that one.
call center's going away. You know, there are a lot of measures that are going away that, to your point, I'm not getting worse. It's just the rules are changing. And, you know, so how do you think about that? Like right now as you're, or, you know, between now and end of year, you know, how does that play into the strategies and how to think about the, you know, the best levers to pull for your contract?
I think there's too much uncertainty right now, especially with I mean, CMS did appeal the decisions that were made. So obviously, you know, there's going to have to be a period here where we wait for those to see if they get, you know, validated or overthrown. And then what does that mean? But you honestly have to, I think, march forward with the expectation that whatever was published, whatever's in place stands. So a good example, like, you know, I've had a lot of folks immediately scratch their heads and say, well, wait a minute, you know, if the way that the ruling happened there where that forced the recalculation, they basically tossed out Part D. And it sounds like to get that implemented accurately, if they're going to go down these suits, you know, they're going to have to like resubmit the information publicly. It's going to have to go through, you know, some approvals and, you know, our judicial system. So, you know, if those things need to happen, that's probably at least a year to 2 years before you could ever see those measures back, right? Maybe longer. But you can't just stop doing medication adherence or worrying about your COB and poly measures and things like that. You can't stop publishing your, you know, MPF data to members. At the end of the day, the core purpose of those is still the right thing, if you will. You know, people that are dealing with chronic conditions, the medications are our primary source of treatment in a lot of ways. So, you know, we still focus on those things. And if you were to hedge your bets and say, like, I think CMS is just going to toss them and pull all your resources away from that, you run the risk that you're going to get the negative surprise whenever somebody, you know, rules in CMS's favor.
And it's like you said, Dan, it's still the right thing to do. Even if it's not a measure that ends up in the star rating program, medication adherence ultimately ties to those other diabetic measures that won't most likely ever be thrown out because they're clinical, you know, like blood pressure, A1C. They're still tied to medication adherence, you know, do better on medication adherence. Those measures typically fall in line with that. And, you know, that's, I think a key thing is keeping focus on still 28 and not, you know, not getting it in the back of your mind. Well, CMS might just throw that measure out. Cause I mean, we've been on calls with health plans before and, you know, leaders ask that. Well, don't you think CMS is going to throw it out? Should we really dedicate resources to that measure? Yes, because it's not thrown out right now, and you'll end up shooting yourself in the foot if you don't.
Yeah. Now, in that same vein, I guarantee you that probably most of the folks out there that are, you know, when they run those multiple scenarios, Mick, where hey, this could happen or that could happen or that could happen. I mean, they know what the potential implications of those are. And then when PP2 comes out and we actually have cut points, we'll know, okay, well, what does that really translate into now? Did something wild and erratic happen in the industry this year and the cut points jumped in a place where we weren't expecting them to? Was there some other anomaly that is just skewing this? You have to assume that if it's favorable and meaningful, that someone's going to invest in a follow-up suit at the end of the year if they don't like the result they get. So if, you know, some version of this says like, wait a minute, I need the same star year 2026 recalculation applied, that's probably where people are spending some time and energy right now, is preparing those arguments, preparing the analysis to say like, hey, what should we do? And I know there are many tools out there that have given people sort of a, hey, we've done the recalculation for you. Here's what your number looks like to help plans validate their own assumptions. So I have to assume that folks are arming themselves in preparation to say, like, as these things are playing out on a very public scale in a couple of different courts, how do we jump on board if necessary, or how do we make a counter argument if needed?
And we actually do have that report that you're mentioning, Dan. And so after this call, I'll make sure that we get yours sent over to you. But yeah, for anyone else,
I knew some folks out there did.
You don't need to be a client. It's free. So, one of the things, you're talking about all the stuff that could spur, activity. But I think a lot of the surprise or the learnings that come out is going to be around reward factor. In a post-Tukey world, reward factor is back to being a 4-star maker. For a while, you had to be 4 stars just to qualify, and it was more of a 5-star maker, right? But you in a post-Tukey world, and then you take out all of the ops measures that are typically highly rated, you're going to see these thresholds coming down even more. And so all of a sudden, a plan not too far, or I mean, decently far away from actual 3.75 could get in with reward factor. Or if you're planning on it and the thresholds shift a little bit, that's a big swing when your score is going to change 10, 20 points, potentially with one change. And I think that's going to be the thing that shocks a lot of plans. You were counting on a reward factor, you didn't get it, or you weren't counting on it and you did. My expectation is that's where you're going to see the biggest surprise.
I think so. I mean, when it went away, I think a lot of folks saw that the QI measures became so much more critical. I don't think anybody really put much stock in the health equity measures in terms of that's going to be the thing that helps boost my star. Most people saw that as a negative.
Agreed.
But the improvement measures became critical. But what's interesting in that is strategy changes, right? Just trying to hit that quality improvement threshold across the board to get yourself up to the 4s and 5s there is very different than trying to get the consistency across your measures that you need in the reward factor. I mean, that's some of those places where you might have just said, look, I need my 2% to get to QI, but I'll accept the 2-star rating on this thing because it's not worth the investment to try and get it to a 4 or 5. When reward factor comes back, all of a sudden that changes, and those 1s and 2s that are the outliers, or even on the rare mathematical equation where jumping to a 5 is the outlier, people are going to have to start being a little bit more strategic with that again, and it's back to kind of playing the game, which is not what we want is the intention of the program, but that's what the math can force you to do sometimes, to say, I need to actually take my foot off of the gas on something, or I need to shift things over here urgently because I got to get this up to a new threshold so that I don't pull myself down on a reward factor.
Well, you're totally right, because you think about the variance part of the reward factor calculation really comes into play, in these situations. And I would tell you, like with STARS 2029 coming in, and again, all of these measures actually leaving, then each one of the remaining measures is that much more important, valuable, impactful to not only star ratings and QI, but to reward factor. And so if you have plan all cause, kind of highly weighted measure that is a 1, it's going to totally hose up your variance and cost you 20 points, in reward factor. And so it is that now you can't really afford to have this one measure that's, a 1 or a 2-star if everything else is up here, just because it's going to tank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It changes the game.
It does. And you talked about the QI measures, STARS 2026, it was, if you went from a 3 to a 4, let's just say, one of your QI measures kicks you up about 6 points, right? But STARS 2029 comes in, and now it's like 9.25 points. I mean, you start to think about the impact that this has, especially with a smaller number of measures. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, on how the stars use the different strategies.
Yeah, I honestly think this year is an interesting sandbox for that as well, because on the Part D side of the world, right, the 3-med adherence measures got tossed basically because they're, going through the tech spec change. So you've got now the 2 newer measures, poly and COB, that will have their first year being calculated into QI. So there's some things there that, there's just less measures and less weighting on Part D. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the thresholds, I guess, really skew, compared to prior years where they're typically really high because you have those 3 weight measures in there. So it's an interesting testing ground when there's less measures. And the weightings are wildly different. Every little thing counts more.
I mean, we're seeing that too with, because you got members choosing to leave in complaints that contribute to that Part D QI specifically. And if you have typically been a plan that is terrible at that, but you were good at medication adherence, sometimes that medication adherence offset that, whether you were in decline for those two measures or not. It's not happening this year because those adherence measures aren't eligible for QI. So you're already taking two double weighted measures in decline, and you've got two single weighted pharmacy measures, three single weighted pharmacy measures. You'll never be able to offset it. And that's what we're seeing in a decent amount of plans with their Part D QI.
I mean, just, waxing philosophical for a moment. I think it's interesting that the technical specification changes that they've made to some of these measures weren't significant enough that they felt they needed to retire them, move them back to display, but they don't consider the QI impact. I mean, they made the change to, CSNP enrollment, 2 years ago. And all of a sudden you started to see members basically abusing the complaint module process as a way to get out of their plan because they no longer just had this freedom to bounce around in SNPs, year over year. Only affects the SNP plans, but it does affect people. And you saw CTM rates for those plans jump dramatically. Wasn't a technical specification change to the complaint measure, right? But it was something that directly influenced it, and they did nothing about that. Then you added providers in and gave them the ability to file complaints and file appeals. So, but, suddenly that change happened to the complaint module. That was new, introduced a ton of new complaints to the system that, again, it's happening this year, but they didn't scrub that one out and say, nah, we're not going to hold that against you. So it's, wax philosophical. Like, there should be maybe a differentiation between this is not statistically significant enough that we're going to remove it from calculation this year and put it in display, but at least think about what those downstream implications are, and I don't know, treat your plans fairly.
Yeah. I mean, and I get the concept too behind the two improving and maintaining mental health measures not qualifying for QI because they're already measuring improvement, but I don't think they're relative to each other. I mean, I actually think those measures should still be in from a QI perspective, but
that's where we philosophically disagree, Phil, because I don't think the Haas measure should even exist. I mean, you are literally asking a population that all of the data says is going to see decline, whether it's their mental health or their physical health. And I understand that there are definitely members in Medicare that skew below those, senior ages. But I mean, all the medical science says that just you're going to experience cognitive decline, physical decline. It's just a part of aging. It's natural. Yet we have two measures that we hold everybody accountable for to ask people if they feel as good or better than they did 2 years ago. To me, it's absurd, but
yeah, most of the time I can't even remember what I was doing yesterday. I can't wait until I'm on Medicare and have to answer Haas questions.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah. So, I mean, look at PP2 obviously coming up. What do you think? I mean, what do you think what happens? You think CMS just calculates ratings as is, lets health plans, pony up the money to sue them?
Oh, I think there's a very good possibility there, honestly. I mean, if I was sitting at a table somewhere and I had $100 in my hand and I was being forced to bet on something, I'd probably put the money there that they're just going to continue to run the STARS program as if none of this other background noise was happening, and then let things shake out. They've already made the retrospective change for the start of 2026, but that was, again, consistency, right? One plan received that. It isn't really consistency because they didn't apply the exact same methodology, but they at least applied something to everybody. So yeah, it feels like the best process, and probably I would guess something they're being legally advised to do, is to just treat this STAR season like it's a normal STAR season. And then when somebody doesn't like the result that they get, they're going to use those lawsuits as precedent and they're going to sue. But again, now that plan's got to go out and spend the money, invest in it, go through the process of the suing, build their argument. The STAR ratings will be public. People will see that throughout AEP. So, whatever impact the STAR ratings are going to have, it's not like, unless somebody does it so fast that they can create a cease and desist on CMS to not publish the STAR ratings because they're in question or under review or something weird. I would have to think that, you just see a normal season. The more interesting question is, when are we going to get PP2? I mean, Yeah, the call center memo basically says that we'll plans will have until September 16th, I think it is, to review and respond back in PP2, but it falls like
Mm-hmm.
it does every year around Labor Day. So the debate is it going to be Friday? I think it's Friday the 4th or something, or 3rd or the 4th, or is it going to be that Tuesday or Wednesday after we get back, that which I think is the 8th and the 9th. So I'm putting my money on the Friday. I think I'm going to drop it
I would think
the
so.
day on Friday. Peace out for the weekend and let you work over.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
about
You know,
5:30
they've already
Eastern
got that.
time it drops.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh. You know they've already got that plan. Like, you guys want to sue us? Fine. Here, enjoy your Labor Day weekend.
No, honestly, my money's there because so far this season they've been actually getting everything out a little bit earlier on the early side of everything. Haas came out early. He just came out early. The actual PP1 file came out. I think that maybe possibly the earliest it's ever come out. I'd have to go back and actually check some dates in that to see. But yeah, they've been on the ball, if you will, this year. So I feel like it makes sense for that to carry forward into PP2, especially since plans have identified some issues that they need to fix. I guess that could also be the counter argument to say, like, I don't know, if there are some data issues they need to fix, maybe they're going to steal those extra couple of days and make sure that they get it all done before they send that. I don't know.
So,
What's your money on,
so
Mick?
with that, I think it's going to be earlier than expected, and it also feels like they're moving away from Fridays. So I don't know. Maybe it's going to be even earlier than you're thinking.
I
So
thought
we'll
maybe we were
see.
going to have like a trading places bet there for a hot second, but
We can put something together.
one.
I'd do a random, it's all about surprises, right? So I'm almost thinking maybe CMS just does both calculations and does better of, and actually runs it both ways, with the program as it is, and then 27 with the 26 measures removed, and maybe calls it a day. But I doubt that will happen. But in a year that's been shockingly surprising, who knows?
But then what happens if one of these courts rules between now and PP2 in favor of the two new health plans that have sued and said, we want the same treatment? So
Yep.
then if they do that, do they do it on just that subset of measures for everybody? Or do they do it on what they did for Star Year 2026? There's so many scenarios there, Phil.
Yeah, there is. And that's why we're still here.
Right. I love this stuff. Truly love this stuff. All right. So this has been good. Like, I think covered a lot of ground. I mean, definitely some PP2 stuff will be interesting to hit on next. But Dan, for right now, either prepping for PP2 or right after PP2 comes out, what should people be doing to either to get ready, or what action should they be taking right when it drops?
It's an interesting gamut to run because you've got the plans that, based on what they're seeing in plan period preview 1, may be at risk, right? If you've got some folks out there that have been sitting on that 2.5 for a couple of years, and they did not see some results come through that they wanted to, or things came through that reconfirmed the things they were hoping wouldn't happen, then they're probably having those discussions around, okay, what can we do? Is there any challenge with CMS we can make? Like, is this even worth it? And that, I got to be honest, guys, this would be an interesting year. I mean, if you look back at our history, right? Like, we were one of the plans that was negatively affected back the year that they published the results with Tukey as it was, and they actually issued a contract shutdown that they had to rescind afterwards. But the damage had been done. When you stop enrolling plans and you start communicating to members that their contract's going to shut down, like, that's bad. So you're going to have those folks scrambling. You're going to have the folks that, are thinking about the implications for AEP, because when that star rating goes live, like, is it going to be a positive change? Is it a negative change? So you're probably preparing talking points for your brokers, talking points for your call centers, talking points for your providers, to share with them either the good news or the, alarming news of, hey, you need to know why we dropped. And then obviously you've got all of your internal messaging and whatever that means. Your public companies, those ratings obviously have more implications, I think, for some folks than maybe your nonprofits or whatever. Just because there's going to be earnings statements out there and they're going to get blasted in the news pretty quickly. But the average folks are managing internal messaging. and probably reinforcing the, so what does this mean? Just because it hits when it does, kind of mid-year, you already kind of knew, or at least you thought you kind of knew how things were going, say, from your CAPS survey. And so now you're preparing for the next one to see, like, hey, how can we improve this? Do we need to improve it? Whatever. But this is the time of year where you see plans go into that, kind of mid-year shift. I guess we're kind of past the mid-year point here, but this is your last chance to try that new vendor, to pilot some new program, whatever you think can move the needle before the end of your measurement period is over. And typically, you see most folks scrambling right now to, use this information. And then you've got the people that are on the cusp, right? That are telling reallocate dollars, resources, initiatives to that line. And you have to prepare the A/B scenario. Like, we are so close that we think it's either going to go here or here. We need to be prepared if it drops to this, or we need to be prepared if it gets what we are hoping for. So, there's no one answer, Mick, but, everyone hopefully is preparing for the possibilities, and the downstream implications of those possibilities for the communications that might need to be considered, the messaging that might need to be considered, and how they can leverage that. I mean, you see a plan with a big turnaround, or you see a plan that, maintains their 5-star, or maintains their 4.5, or whatever it is. That's great messaging that you can leverage going into cap season, going into AEP, things like that.
I mean, this is just fun stuff. I could talk about this stuff all day. But Dan, Phil, thank you guys for jumping in today, sharing the insights. And based on this, I know we'll be connecting again soon to touch on this.
Maybe we need to get Phil painting for the background there, Mick, though. Looks like he's hanging out by the fireplace.
I'll put that requisition in. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the time.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Sounds good, guys.